Welcome to the sixth video blog for this course. Two things to cover for today is a couple of words about the Democracy Transition Geopolitical Risks Unit, and then also secondly the one on terrorism. Now for the geopolitical risk one, for the Arab Spring component, generally this is kind of a good example of what we need to be looking at for the general strategic environment, how it might evolve around us, and to be careful that we don't actually get caught out by situations around us. There's a concept called the boiled frog. Now, some of you may well have heard of the boiled frog, but generally speaking, it requires that you have the frog. In this case, I've got my 2.5-year-old's toy here. But if you have a frog that goes into water that's already hot, the frog will then jump out. Poof. However, if the frog is already in the saucepan and you gradually bring it to a boil, by the time that the water gets too hot for the frog, it's too late for it to be able to get out of the saucepan. Don't know how this has been tried and been found out, but anyway, this is sort of one of the things that you can often hear about. So in the political risk analysis area, we want to be careful that we don't end up being that boiled frog. And so be aware of those external indicators as they evolve. And probably looking at indicators beyond what our immediate parameters might be in the political risk field we might normally traditionally see. But as analysts, we want to sort of broaden that area a little bit. I'll give you an example. So for example, you read a case study whereby the Spanish energy firm Respol was nationalized by the Argentinian government as for the component that was in the joint venture with the Argentina firm YPF. Now, arguably, you could see the winds of these things potentially occurring as the government itself, the government of President Kirchner, taking more of a nationalistic stance towards the country and the international environment. One key area which really developed was with its relations and its tone towards the Falkland Islands, or the Malvinas, as the Argentinians call it. The Falklands, as you're probably aware, is a British island in the South Atlantic Ocean, which Argentina claims, and Argentina and the UK went to war over it in 82. Now, in the last couple of years, Argentina has increased its rhetoric stating that the Falklands belongs to Argentina. And so it's part of a wider kind of nationalistic approach that the government was taking. So you had that occurring in that area, and then you had this YPF Respol issue then occurring. And a few other data points as well, indicating that the situation probably wasn't quite as good and productive for international companies as they probably once thought when entering into the region a few years back. So by identifying what data points that we should be on the lookout for will then help us to anticipate, at least better anticipate, and forewarn ourselves of what's happening around us. Now, for the terrorism component, just a couple of words on that. One of the key things that organisations, public or private, need to be aware of is the intent and capability of terrorist groups. And then from that, they can then assess what is the threat, whether directly or indirectly, to their own operations. Capability naturally meaning the ability to carry out the attacks and over what length of time, and secondly, the intent is, as I suggest, what they're looking to go after. And some groups would maybe go for very discrete targets. Other groups may go for very much indiscriminate attacks. Now, a good one of a discrete targeting practice was the IRA in parts of the UK from the troubles from the 60s to the 90s. Until the peace agreement in 98. Now, also 2008. Now, one of the key elements of that was they had this strategy whereby they would give coded warnings to organisations to say there is likely to be a target at, say, this Victoria London train station, and the bomb will go off in a few minutes. The reason why they did that was to limit the amount of civilian collateral damage, but what they're seeking to do is to maximize the economic disruption caused by the attacks. So they realised if they caused too many civilian casualties, they would lose sympathy amongst their core supporters across Ireland and maybe internationally as well. And so various organisations, including where I was working at James, we had this sheet of paper that said if someone called saying they were from the IRA, take down the location where the attack is attended and also the coded word they give you, then phone the police, and then they can cross-check the code word which you have been given with known code words that they have on the database to be able to identify whether this is a credible threat or not. So we have that, more an economic disruption, and also the IRA targeted the financial district. But guess when they try to target it? Not during the week, during the workday. They often target it at the weekends. On a Sunday morning, a big bomb will go off somewhere. And the idea being to try and destroy the infrastructure, destroy the confidence, and get key financial firms, which it knew the UK saw as a key lifeblood, to move abroad. Go to Frankfurt in Germany, maybe, for example. And so the British government, is one way to mitigate these attacks and help to blunt the effects on companies, was to say, we would help to cover your insurance costs to rebuild your buildings should they get hit by terrorists. Because the terrorists are trying to inflict the, economic damage to companies. And so the government stepped in and said, right, we're setting up a fund to help to repair your buildings should that occur. Now, some companies, there may be losses for where companies don't do particularly well, but some others may actually do quite well over a terrorist campaign. The Second Intifada in Israel is a good example, where the 4-year campaign from 2000 to 2004, which saw a significant number of suicide attacks, where people, Israelis generally, they stayed at home, particularly in the evenings. They didn't really head out to restaurants or to cinemas as much as they used to for fear of there being a bomb attack. So whereas, say, restaurants and cinemas and those kinds of areas saw a slight decline in their business activity and demand, there were sectors which actually had increased in demand. And that was in, say, DVD rentals, as Israelis were staying at home more often, and therefore there was a greater demand for DVD rentals. Also, home improvements became a booming area within the Israeli economy. DIY projects became very much fashionable for many as they were spending more time at home. So they thought, well, we're going to spend more time there. We'll spruce our place up. We'll go down to a DIY store. We'll purchase some DIY magazines. And so those areas actually saw an increase in activity and productivity there. So generally we've seen when there's times of real kind of maybe real problems and maybe if not crisis, but real sort of pressure on there, some will do maybe not so well, but there will be winners as well. And so identifying who those winners are going to be and whether your sector is in that and how you're going to fit in there. Then for the oil industry, in terms of where they are dealing with internal violence, by the nature of their business, they have fixed assets in fixed places, so they're likely to have a greater tolerance level for such attacks, but still be able to recognise the importance and the need to be able to carry out their activities. And hence we see a lot of concerted effort to keep the oil fields in the Kurdish controlled areas in northern Iraq active in the face of the issues from ISIS at the moment. And then you've got the Adam Rose piece this week which you're reading, which provides a kind of a good framework to understand what type of economic disruptions companies may see and how to measure those effects and those ripple effects. Is it just the direct damage? Or how can we take into account lost productivity? What about the ripple effects as people from consumers change their behaviours and attitudes, and modify their routines, and the detrimental impacts of that? So those are some of the things that I want you to consider when you read through the Adam Rose piece. Yes, it can be, there's a lot of kind of economic analysis and arguments in there, but it's the general parameters to give you an overall understanding of what's occurring there. Okay, so one final word before I finish off this last video blog. It's been great to have you all for this past few weeks, and please do remember to submit your final paper by the deadline of this Saturday, please. And as we've gone through the course, we've been covering various different data points and frameworks, from the risk perception and risk analysis area, of the social license to operate, how people perceive issues and how that might impact organizations, to then secondly more kind of traditional areas, I say, from how the field originally grew, looking at expropriation regulatory fields. And then the last couple of classes looking at last week and this week, how we can better measure, how can we better measure and better anticipate what's going out there. Really good, interesting insights on the discussion board last week, including ideas of how can we better use crowdsourcing to be able to inform the political risk analysis area and the challenges between quantitative and qualitative data. And then finishing up, the last element is on terrorism and internal violence, a critical area, particularly for a number of countries. But the key thing really for all of this is that the course provides you a series of frameworks and approaches to look at issues, but it's down to you at the end of the day to decide which framework or frameworks are most appropriate to take forward to address the problem you have. It's to customize them and say, what kind of data points do I need to look out for, integrate, collapse in, and keep an eye on a fairly frequent basis. That will depend on what area of field you're looking at, region, amount of activity. So better slice and dice the content accordingly to be able to customize that. And the field is very vibrant, it's moving, it's continuously evolving, which makes it exciting, but also be able to keep an eye on, well, what is it exactly I'm going to need to take off to say to really be informed and be beneficial for me. So thanks so much, and do feel free to keep in contact with me after this course. It'll be great to hear how you proceed forward and things, and have a great week. Thank you.